Okay, need to keep going, so I'm definitely running out of time. So calculation questions are quantitative questions. They include deduction of equations sometimes. They might require you interpreting data sets, figures, equations, or graphs to obtain values required for calculations. They might have multiple dependent steps. Now, I've definitely said this yesterday, so I'll say it again today. If you can't do a step, make up a number. Say, assuming the number of moles of sodium chloride is this, and make up a reasonable number, 0.2, 1.5, 2 moles, whatever it is. Don't go for 1,000 moles because you'll just make your life really difficult and it will feel weird moving forwards with those numbers. Come up with what you consider to be a reasonable number and just say, assuming the moles of sodium chloride are this, and then use that number moving forwards. If you think you could do the end of a back titration question, but you can't work out a beginning bit of the calculation, skip it, make up a number and use it moving forwards, because you can get working out answers. As long as you're clear to your examiner what you have done. So I have made up this number. So you would say something like, assuming the number of moles of this is this. Then your examiner goes, right, okay. So they didn't know what that was, so they don't get that mark or any of the previous marks, but I can give them that mark because they've used that number correctly. I can give them that mark because they've used that number correctly. They've applied it here so they can get that mark. You can get yourself a lot more marks than you think if you can't start a question. That's similar if you get halfway through and you can't get it, but you think there's more to be done at the end. Make up the middle number and keep going. 100% I would recommend. So command words you might be expecting to see: calculate, determine, or just show your working. So they might say determine something and show your working. That means they want to see your working because there will be marks available. It is heartbreaking as an examiner to have blank space and an answer and you can't see what they've done and the answer's wrong. And if it's a 3-mark question, they've lost all 3 marks because they've made an error that you can't tell where. And I can't give any marks for working out because they haven't given me any workings. So really, really would recommend showing your working as clearly as possible. It will help you for when you're checking your own answers because you don't have to, you can follow your own process. And B, it's helpful for your examiner for assigning marks. So for examples, calculate a value, determine the value of, show your working of, blah, blah, blah. In your spec, again, it'll be things like they'll ask you to calculate, blah, 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 or determine. You might be asked to determine something as well. So students should be expected to determine the concentration of blah, 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 or whatever. Let's keep going because we're running out of time. So calculates require a numerical answer to the correct number of significant figures and with units. Set out your work step by step. I've already said this. Include all of your steps, however small, and make it clear what you're working out. This is the number of moles of sodium chloride in 25 centimeters cubed. I know it's a lot to write, but that tells your examiner exactly what that is. And also, if you're then looking to work out, for example, from 25 to 250 centimeters cubed, you've reminded yourself you've only done 25 and you need to then convert it into 250 centimeters cubed or something. It's really useful for kind of guiding you forwards as well. You usually get a mark for each piece of working and state any relevant formula, even if you can't start the calculation, because if it's a formula that needs to be recalled, often there's a mark for it. For example, in KC questions or KP questions, just stating the KP formula, if it hasn't been given to you, will get you the mark because you've written a correct formula, for example. We're not going to have time to go through this in any detail, but please feel free to have a go at it yourself. So we've got an equation. They've asked you to calculate the carbon-oxygen mean bond enthalpy using mean bond enthalpies given in the table and the enthalpy change of reaction. So there's 2 things you've got to calculate there. And I would highly recommend when you come across a question like this, where the second thing is kind of sneakily hidden in the question, highlight it or put a star by it. Remind yourself that you're calculating 2 things, the mean bond enthalpy and the enthalpy change of reaction. Because the number of times students get halfway through a question and think they've finished and they've lost, 2 marks because they've only done 1 thing instead of 2. It happens a lot. Again, I won't be able to go through it now, but have a calculate, blah, blah, blah. With these questions, do think about whether or not, with any enthalpy question, think about whether or not the value you're giving should be positive or negative. Are you expecting it to be positive? Or are you expecting it to be negative? Because the number of times, again, students miss signs off, and then you lose a whole mark for that. It happens far too often. Okay.